The cruelest thing a husband can do is not stop loving his wife, but make her feel ashamed for being exactly who she was when he found her. Amara Brooks stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the Whitmore penthouse, her hands resting lightly against the sides of an old midnight blue dress that seemed almost too quiet for the room around it. Beyond the glass, Manhattan glittered 48 stories below, all silver traffic, golden windows, and restless ambition, while behind her the bedroom looked like a magazine spread no one was allowed to touch. White marble, pale silk curtains, a chandelier bright enough to make diamonds nervous. And in the center of all that expensive perfection stood Amara, a black woman with deep brown skin, soft curls pinned at the nape of her neck, and a dress that had survived more years than most people in that building had survived hardships. The fabric was not new. Anyone could see that. The hem had been carefully lowered once, then raised again. The left seam held a line of hand stitching so fine it almost looked like a secret. Near the waist, where the satin had thinned with age, Amara had reinforced it herself the night before, sitting barefoot beside the window while the city blinked beneath her like 1,000 impatient eyes. She touched that seam now, and for a moment the penthouse disappeared. She was 8 years old again, sitting on the floor of a small apartment in Queens, watching her mother, Rosalind Brooks, guide a needle through cloth after a 12-hour nursing shift. Rosalind's feet would be swollen, her shoulders tired, but her voice always stayed gentle when she said, "Baby, never let rich rooms make you feel small. God did not make your soul secondhand." Amara swallowed softly, holding the memory like a candle cupped against the wind. Tonight was the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, the kind of event where senators shook hands with CEOs, where cameras flashed before anyone said anything worth remembering, where a woman's dress could become a headline before her name ever did. Nathaniel Whitmore had reminded her of that 3 times since breakfast. His tuxedo jacket hung over the back of a chair, black and sharp and flawless. His cuff links, white gold engraved with the Whitmore family crest, waited beside his watch. Everything about Nathaniel's world had been designed to announce importance before the man himself entered the room. The bedroom door opened without a knock. Amara saw him first in the mirror, tall, white, handsome in the polished way wealth teaches men to stand, his dark blonde hair combed back, his jaw freshly shaved, his expression already impatient. For half a second, his eyes softened when they found her. Then they moved to the dress. The softness vanished. He stopped near the doorway, as if the fabric had offended him from across the room. "Amara," he said carefully, the way people speak when they want their cruelty to sound reasonable. "This is the Whitmore Gala, not a church basement fundraiser." The words landed quietly, but they took the air with them. Amara did not turn around. She watched his reflection watch her, and in the silence between them she heard every society whisper she had pretended not to hear for 2 years. Too plain, too different, too humble, too lucky. Her fingers stayed on the seam her mother had sewn by hand. Nathaniel stepped closer, lowering his voice as though the walls themselves might report him to the press. "I had Elise send over 3 gowns from Bergdorf. The silver one would photograph beautifully. Why would you choose this?" Amara looked at the woman in the mirror, the woman her mother had prayed over, the woman this house had tried to polish into someone less inconvenient. "Because it belonged to my mother," she said. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose, not angry enough to shout, not kind enough to understand. "I know it means something to you, but meaning doesn't always look appropriate on camera." At that, something inside Amara went very still. Not broken. Not yet. Still. She reached for her wedding ring, turning it once around her finger, feeling the smooth circle warm beneath her touch. She remembered the man who had once visited a community center in Harlem and watched her calm a crying child with nothing but patience and a paper cup of apple juice. She remembered how he had looked at her then, as if kindness were a language he had forgotten but wanted badly to learn. That man had asked for her number with nervous hands. This man was asking her to disappear inside a designer gown so his donors would feel comfortable. "Are you ashamed of me?" she asked. Nathaniel's eyes lifted quickly. "Don't be dramatic." It was not an answer, and because it was not an answer, it became one. Outside, the first car from the security detail pulled beneath the awning. Downstairs, photographers were already gathering behind velvet ropes, waiting for the billionaire and his wife to arrive like a perfect picture wrapped in money. Amara smoothed the front of the old blue dress. The fabric did not shine like diamonds. It did not beg for approval. It simply held its shape, dignified and patient, like the woman who had worn it before her. Nathaniel checked his watch. We're going to be late. Amara finally turned from the mirror. Her face was calm, her voice gentle enough to make the truth hurt more. Then let's not keep the cameras waiting. The ride down from the penthouse felt longer than 48 floors should have felt. Amara stood beside Nathaniel in the private elevator, watching their reflections stretch across the brushed steel doors like two strangers dressed for the same lie. He adjusted one cuff link, then the other, his movements precise, controlled, almost beautiful in their discipline. He had built an empire that way, by never letting discomfort show, by turning every room into a boardroom and every silence into leverage. But marriage was not supposed to feel like a negotiation, and lately, every quiet moment between them seemed to come with terms neither of them had signed. When the elevator opened into the marble lobby, the evening staff straightened at once. The doorman wished them a pleasant night. The concierge smiled too brightly. Everyone knew how to admire a Whitmore without looking too closely. Outside, the Blacktown car waited beneath the awning, its polished door reflecting the city lights in smooth, broken streaks. Nathaniel placed his hand at Amara's lower back, not tenderly, not possessively, but with the practiced ease of a man who understood public gestures. To anyone watching, it looked like affection. To Amara, it felt like direction. She slid into the back seat first, gathering the old blue dress carefully so the hem would not catch beneath her heel. Nathaniel followed, bringing with him the clean scent of cedar, cologne, and expensive restraint. For several blocks, neither of them spoke. Manhattan moved around them in ribbons of yellow taxis, glowing storefronts, and people hurrying beneath the early autumn chill. Amara watched a woman in sneakers laugh into her phone outside a deli, free in a way that made something ache behind her ribs. She had not always lived inside glass towers and guarded entrances. Before Nathaniel, her life had been smaller, yes, but it had also been honest. She had worked at the West 132nd Community Center, teaching young women how to prepare for interviews, helping mothers fill out housing forms, sitting with teenagers who needed someone to say their dreams out loud without laughing. That was where Nathaniel had first seen her, not under chandeliers, not beside donors, but kneeling beside a little boy whose paper cup of apple juice had spilled across his homework. The boy had started crying because he thought his teacher would be angry. Amara had taken a napkin, dabbed the page, and said, "Then we will make the stain part of the story." Nathaniel had stood in the doorway, silent, watching as if he had discovered a kind of wealth no bank had ever measured. Back then, he asked questions. He listened. He returned the next week without cameras and helped unload boxes of donated coats from a truck in 30-degree weather. He had laughed when one of the older women called him too pretty to be useful. He had looked almost relieved to be treated like a person instead of a last name. That was the man Amara had fallen in love with. The man who ate takeout with her on the steps of the center because the office chairs were all taken. The man who once told her that her calm made him feel less afraid of his own life. But after the wedding, the world around him began correcting her. His mother corrected her posture at charity luncheons. His public relations team corrected her words before interviews. Stylists corrected her hair, her colors, her shoes, her smile. Nathaniel never called it shame. He called it preparation. He called it protecting her. He called it helping her adjust. But little by little, Amara realized adjustment meant becoming easier for his world to accept and harder for herself to recognize. His phone vibrated, breaking the memory. He glanced at the screen, and even in the dim back seat, she saw the name Elise Palmer, his head of public relations. He answered with a quiet, "Yes." Amara turned toward the window, but the voice on the other end was sharp enough to cut through the car's soft leather silence. "The photographers are already asking whether Mrs. Whitmore is wearing the emerald gown we approved. Vogue Daily has a camera team near the entrance. We need consistency tonight." Nathaniel rubbed 2 fingers against his temple. "We are on our way." A pause. Then Elise said something Amara could not fully hear. Only the words image risk and donor optics. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I said we are on our way." He ended the call, but the damage remained seated between them like a third passenger. Amara looked at him. "Is that what I am now? An image risk?" "That is not what she meant. But you understood her." He turned to her then. frustration flashing beneath his polished calm. You know how these events work, Amara. People talk. Cameras exaggerate everything. One picture becomes a story before midnight. And what story are you afraid they will tell? Nathaniel looked away too quickly. The city lights slid across his face, gold, then shadow, then gold again. Amara nodded once, almost to herself. She did not need him to say it. His silence had already learned to speak fluently. The car slowed near the Grand Harrington Hotel, where velvet ropes curved along the sidewalk and photographers gathered beneath white lights bright enough to turn night into theater. Amara placed one hand over the seam of her mother's dress. Her heartbeat was steady now, not because she was unhurt, but because pain sometimes arrives so clearly that it becomes direction. Nathaniel reached for the door handle, then paused. Just stay close to me tonight. Amara looked through the tinted glass at the waiting cameras, then back at the man who had once admired her because she made stains part of the story. No, Nathaniel, she said softly. Tonight, I think I need to stand where I can breathe. The door opened to a storm of white flashes. Nathaniel stepped out first, his expression settling into the calm mask that had helped him close billion-dollar deals and survive magazine profiles that used words like visionary and untouchable. A ripple moved through the photographers as they recognized him. Voices rose from behind the velvet ropes, calling his name, asking him to turn left, to look center, to smile with his wife. For one brief second, Amara remained inside the car, looking at the bright entrance of the Grand Harrington Hotel. The building rose above her in polished limestone and glass, its golden revolving doors spinning with guests wrapped in satin, velvet, diamonds, and old family names. She inhaled once, touched the side seam of her mother's dress, and stepped onto the curb. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, and the crisp October air brushed her shoulders like a warning. At first, the cameras hesitated. She saw it happen. The smallest pause. The shift from expectation to confusion. They had expected the emerald designer gown Elise Palmer had leaked to the style pages that morning. They had expected a wife carefully packaged to match the Whitmore brand. Instead, they got Amara Brooks Whitmore in midnight blue fabric older than some of the reporters waiting to judge it. Nathaniel moved closer, offering his arm. She looked at it, then placed her hand lightly on his sleeve because dignity did not require a scene. Together they walked beneath the lights, but Amara could feel the question gathering around her. Who dressed her? Why that gown? Was it intentional? Was it a mistake? One photographer lowered his camera too soon, as if the answer was obvious. Another snapped a picture with the quick appetite of someone who smelled a story but did not yet understand it. Inside, the ballroom was warmer, louder, and more dangerous in the way beautiful rooms can be dangerous when kindness has not been invited. Crystal chandeliers poured light over hundreds of guests. A string quartet played near a marble staircase wrapped in white orchids. Waiters moved between clusters of donors with silver trays of sparkling water and champagne. At the far end of the room, a large banner read Whitmore Foundation Annual Benefit for Working Families, the words painted in elegant gold above photographs of people who were not in the room. Amara noticed that first. Faces like the women she knew from the community center hung along the walls as decoration, while the people who claimed to serve them discussed tax strategy beneath the flowers. Nathaniel's mother, Marjorie Whitmore, appeared near the receiving line in a pearl gray gown and a smile that had been trained by generations of restraint. Her eyes touched Amara's dress, paused, and moved away as if politeness itself had flinched. "Nathaniel," she said, kissing the air beside her son's cheek. "The governor is asking for you." Then, after a delay too small to prove and too sharp to miss, she added, "Amara, how meaningful." Meaningful. The word hung there, wrapped in silk and insult. "Thank you, Marjorie," Amara said. "It is." Before Nathaniel could respond, Celeste Monroe glided toward them with the confidence of a woman who had never wondered whether she belonged anywhere. Her champagne-colored gown shimmered with every step, and her smile widened when she saw the old blue dress, not with admiration, but with opportunity. "Amara, darling," Celeste said, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "How brave of you to wear something so personal to an event like this." A few people turned. A few smiled into their glasses. Nathaniel's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at his side, but he said nothing. Amara looked at Celeste for one calm second. She thought of her mother sewing under a kitchen lamp, of women taking buses before sunrise, of church basements where donated clothes were pressed and folded with more reverence than gowns in this room would ever receive. Then she smiled. Some things survive long enough to become valuable, she said. The small circle around them went still. Celeste blinked, her smile not quite recovering. Nathaniel looked at Amara as if he had heard her voice for the first time all evening. But the moment passed when a board member approached him with urgent praise and a waiting handshake. Nathaniel turned toward the conversation, and just like that, Amara found herself at the edge of the group, close enough to be displayed, far enough to be forgotten. She did not chase his attention. She did not shrink from their glances. She moved slowly toward the foundation exhibit along the west wall, where photographs showed women in uniforms, hairnets, scrubs, aprons, and work boots. Beneath each picture was a short sentence about resilience, opportunity, and hope. Amara stopped before the image of a hospital aide holding a lunchbox in one hand and a child's backpack in the other. The woman's eyes were tired but bright. Her shoes looked sensible. Her smile looked earned. Amara felt the tightness in her chest loosen. Here, away from the polished cruelty of the ballroom, the dress did not feel out of place. It felt like testimony. Behind her, laughter rose and fell, silverware chimed. Cameras flashed for people who knew how to stand beneath attention without giving anything real to it. Amara touched the glass frame gently. "I see you," she whispered, so quietly no one else could hear. But someone did hear. A woman's voice, older and warm with curiosity, spoke from just beside her. "And I believe that dress sees them too." Amara turned and found Diane Porter watching her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with the rare attention of a person who understood that fabric could carry history. In Diane's hand was a small recorder. Around her neck hung a press badge, and in her eyes was the first honest question Amara had been asked all night. Diane Porter did not introduce herself with the sharp confidence most reporters used when they wanted a quote before the subject could think. She stood beside Amara as though they were both guests at the same quiet memory, her silver hair swept into a low twist, her black velvet jacket simple enough to be expensive and old enough to suggest she no longer dressed for approval. For years, Diane had been one of the most respected voices in American fashion journalism, the kind of woman who could end a designer's season with one sentence or rescue a forgotten artist with one paragraph. Yet when she looked at Amara, her attention did not feel like judgment. It felt like recognition. "May I ask who made it?" Diane said, her eyes resting on the midnight blue dress with unusual care. Amara's hand moved instinctively to the seam at her waist. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel was laughing politely beside the governor, his posture perfect, his face turned toward power. For a moment, Amara considered giving the kind of answer this room preferred. Vintage, family piece, custom altered, something clean enough to fit inside a caption. But the photograph in front of her, the tired hospital aide with the lunchbox and the child's backpack, seemed to ask for more honesty than that. "My mother," Amara said. Diane's expression softened, but she did not interrupt. Amara looked down at the dress, and the light from the chandelier caught the worn satin in a way that made it glow, not brightly, but deeply, like water holding the last color of dusk. Her name was Rosalind Brooks. She worked as a nurse's aide at St. Mary's in Queens for almost 26 years. Most nights, she came home smelling like antiseptic and hand lotion. She used to say those were the perfumes of honest work. Diane smiled faintly. "That sounds like a woman worth remembering." She was. Amara's voice remained steady, though the room around her seemed to fade. "She made this dress from leftover fabric a patient's daughter gave her. It was not enough material at first, so she added panels from an old curtain and lined it with cotton from a church donation box. She wore it to her nursing certification ceremony when I was 10. Diane glanced at the hem, then at the side panel with sudden understanding. "That explains the construction. The handwork is remarkable." Amara gave a small laugh, soft and full of ache. She would have loved hearing that. She thought of sewing as survival first and art second. "Often the best art begins that way," Diane said. A young photographer from an online-style magazine drifted closer, pretending to study the exhibit while angling his lens toward them. Amara noticed, but did not step back. For once, the attention did not feel like a trap. Diane lifted her recorder slightly, asking permission without words. Amara nodded. What made you wear it tonight? Diane asked. The answer rose in Amara before she could polish it for the room. Because this event is supposed to honor working families. And my mother was one. She spent her life caring for people who sometimes forgot to look at her face. She cleaned rooms, changed sheets, calmed frightened patients, rode the bus home after midnight, and still woke me up for school with a pressed uniform and breakfast on the table. Her fingers brushed the seam again. This dress reminds me that dignity does not arrive when someone wealthy approves of you. Sometimes dignity is what carries you into rooms that were never designed with you in mind. Diane held very still. The photographer stopped pretending. The click of his camera sounded once, then again. Not intrusive, almost reverent. Do you know, Diane said slowly. In the 1990s, there was a community sewing initiative in Queens called Second Sunday Stitch. Women altered donated fabric into formal wear for graduations, church ceremonies, court hearings, job interviews, anything that required someone to walk into a room with their head high. I wrote a short column about it years ago. Amara's breath caught. My mother went there every month. Diane's eyes brightened with the satisfaction of history finding its missing thread. Then this is not just an old dress, Mrs. Whitmore. This is part of a movement people forgot too soon. The words moved through Amara like a door opening. Around them, the ballroom continued its polished performance. Donors smiling beneath flowers, servers lifting silver trays, cameras waiting for famous faces. Yet in that small space beside the exhibit wall, something real had begun. The young photographer lowered his camera and asked, almost shyly, "Would you mind if I posted a short clip of what you just said?" Amara hesitated. She thought of Nathaniel's warning, Elise Palmer's panic, Marjorie's careful disappointment, Celeste's jeweled cruelty. Then she thought of Rosalind Brooks sitting at a kitchen table under weak yellow light, turning scraps into beauty because her daughter was watching. "You may," Amara said, "but please include my mother's name." The photographer nodded, suddenly serious. "I promise." Within minutes, while Nathaniel shook hands near the stage and Celeste arranged herself beside a congressman for photographs, the clip began moving from phone to phone under the glow of the ballroom tables. People who had ignored Amara's dress now leaned closer to their screens. People who had smirked at the fabric now read the caption twice. The woman in the midnight blue dress was no longer a mistake in the picture. She was becoming the reason people looked at it. By the time the first course was served, the room had begun to change its breathing. At first, it was subtle. A woman in a silver gown paused beside the dessert display, phone in hand, eyes lifting from the screen to Amara and back again. A young donor near the silent auction whispered to his wife, then looked toward the exhibit wall with a new kind of attention. Two assistants from the event staff stood near the service entrance, watching the clip with their shoulders almost touching, their faces softening in recognition. The ballroom had been built for speeches, donations, applause, and carefully managed admiration, but something unplanned had slipped through the seams. Truth often enters that way, quietly, wearing something people almost dismissed. Amara remained beside Diane Porter, answering questions in a voice that never tried to become larger than the story itself. She spoke about her mother's bus rides before sunrise, about the women from Second Sunday Stitch who turned donated fabric into graduation dresses and interview suits, about the lesson Rosalind Brooks repeated whenever money was short and hope felt thinner than thread. You do not have to look expensive to be worthy of respect. The young photographer's clip had been posted less than 20 minutes earlier, but already people were sharing it with captions that carried the room beyond itself. My grandmother had a dress like this. My mother worked nights too. This is what legacy looks like. Under the chandeliers, strangers began seeing their own families inside Amara's memory. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel noticed the shift before he understood it. He was standing near the governor, half listening to a conversation about affordable housing credits, when one of the foundation trustees leaned toward him and said, "Your wife is extraordinary." Nathaniel turned politely, expecting the usual compliment about grace or appearance, something polished and forgettable. But the trustee was looking past him, toward the growing circle near the exhibit wall. "I had no idea she was speaking tonight," the man added. Nathaniel's smile held, but only because years of practice kept it there. "Neither did I," he said. His gaze followed the trustee's, and for the first time that evening, he saw not the dress, not the risk, Not the possible headline Elise Palmer had feared, but the woman inside the circle of light. Amara was not performing. That unsettled him most. She was not trying to charm donors or rescue his reputation. She was simply standing in the truth of where she came from, and the room was bending toward her because of it. A camera crew from a lifestyle network turned away from the stage setup and moved toward Diane. Another reporter adjusted her microphone and asked if Amara would answer a few questions on record. Celeste Monroe saw them go. Her smile tightened so quickly it almost vanished. For an hour, Celeste had been positioning herself in the best corners of the room, laughing near important men, tilting her face toward flashes, making sure every bracelet caught light. But now the cameras were walking past her, not cruelly, not dramatically, but with the simple indifference that wounds vanity more than insult. Interesting, Celeste murmured to Marjorie Whitmore, who stood beside her with a glass of untouched sparkling water. Apparently sentiment is fashionable tonight. Marjorie did not answer. She was watching Amara too, but not with Celeste's annoyance. Something more complicated moved across her face, something between discomfort and dawning respect. For 2 years, Marjorie had treated Amara like a delicate social problem. Her son had married without consulting the family calendar. She had called it concern. She had called it tradition. But now, listening to guests repeat Rosalind Brooks's name with admiration, Marjorie felt the first sting of a question she had avoided for too long. What if the problem had never been that Amara did not belong in their world? What if their world had simply been too small to understand her? Near the exhibit wall, Diane asked, "Do you believe fashion can hold moral memory?" Amara considered the question. A flash went off, then another, painting the blue dress in silver light. "I believe anything can hold memory if love has touched it," she said. A dress, a lunchbox, a work badge, a bus pass folded in a Bible. People with money often call those things ordinary because they have never needed them to survive. But for families like mine, ordinary things become sacred because they carry us from one day to the next. The reporter beside Diane lowered her microphone slightly, as though the words deserved air around them. Then a woman from the catering staff, older, black, with tired eyes and perfect posture, stopped at the edge of the circle. She held an empty tray against her waist and looked at Amara with an expression so open it nearly broke the moment. "My mother sewed my prom dress from hotel curtains," she said softly. "I used to be embarrassed to tell people that." Amara turned toward her completely, giving her the respect of full attention. "Was it beautiful?" The woman's smile trembled. "It was yellow. Too bright, probably." "Then I hope you remember it as sunlight," Amara said. The circle fell silent, and in that silence, something gentle passed through the room, something no sponsor had paid for and no public relations team could manufacture. The camera crew captured it. So did Nathaniel, from across the ballroom, standing perfectly still while the woman he had asked to change became the only person no one wanted to look away from. Elise Palmer appeared at his side, phone pressed to her chest, her voice low and urgent. "Nathaniel, this is spreading fast. The clip is already past 100,000 views. Style editors are reposting it. The Foundation account is getting tagged everywhere. This could be very good if we frame it correctly." Nathaniel heard the words, but they sounded distant, almost vulgar. Frame it correctly, as if Amara's pain, her mother's labor, the quiet holiness of that dress were just another angle to manage. He looked at Elise, then back at his wife. For the first time that night, shame did not come from what Amara wore. It came from what he had failed to see. On the small stage, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone and asked guests to take their seats for the evening program. But the room did not settle toward the stage. Its attention remained with Amara. Diane Porter turned to the event chair and whispered something. The chair looked surprised, then uncertain, then moved quickly toward Nathaniel. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "there has been a change. We would like to invite your wife to speak before the pledge announcement." Nathaniel's throat tightened. Across the room, Amara looked up as if she had felt the decision before anyone told her. Their eyes met over the heads of donors, reporters, waiters, and all the polished witnesses of his mistake. He expected fear in her face, or anger, or the plea he had grown too accustomed to receiving whenever his world became too much for her. But Amara gave him none of those things. She only stood calmly in her mother's dress, surrounded by cameras that had chosen truth over perfection, and waited to see whether he would finally step aside. The walk to the stage felt longer than the drive through Manhattan. Amara moved through the ballroom slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she understood that some moments deserved to be entered with care. The conversations faded one by one as guests turned in their chairs. The string quartet lowered its music until only a thin ribbon of melody remained beneath the sound of her footsteps. Cameras followed her from the exhibit wall, past the silent auction tables, past Celeste Monroe's frozen smile, past Marjorie Whitmore's uncertain eyes, and toward the small platform where the evening's official speakers had expected to praise generosity without naming the people who made generosity necessary. Nathaniel stood near the front row, his hands at his sides. He could have moved to escort her. He could have stepped into the frame and made the moment look like something they had planned together. For once, he did neither. He remained still, and that restraint, small as it was, became the first honest thing he had offered her all night. Amara reached the microphone. The lights were warm against her face, bright enough that the audience dissolved into shapes and shadows, but she could still see the blue glow of phone screens lifted across the room. She could still feel the seam beneath her fingers, the one Rosalind Brooks had sewn by hand at a kitchen table in Queens. The event chair introduced her with a trembling voice, calling her inspiring, unexpected, unforgettable. Amara did not know what to do with those words. Praise could be another kind of costume if a person was not careful. She adjusted the microphone and waited until the room was completely silent. My mother used to say that the way a person treats ordinary things tells you how they will treat ordinary people. Her voice was steady, low, and clear. She said that while folding hospital sheets. She said it while mending socks. She said it while turning leftover fabric into something I thought was magic. A few people smiled, but no one laughed. Amara looked toward the exhibit wall, where photographs of working families glowed beneath gold lettering. Tonight, this room is raising money for families like the one I came from. Families who wake before sunrise, who ride 2 buses to work, who pack lunches in reused containers, who pray the car will start, who smile at customers who never learn their names, who come home tired and still find enough love to help a child with homework. Her breath paused, but her voice did not break. My mother was one of those women. She was not famous. She did not own a company. She did not have a stylist, a driver, or a table named after her. But she knew how to make people feel seen. She knew how to bring dignity into a room, even when the room had not saved a seat for her. Diane Porter stood near the cameras with one hand pressed lightly to her heart. The catering worker in the back wiped at her eyes with the corner of a napkin. Nathaniel stared at the floor for a moment, then forced himself to look up because hiding from the truth would only make him smaller. Amara continued. This dress was made from scraps, curtains, donated cotton, and a mother's tired hands. Some people might look at it and see something old, something inappropriate, something that does not belong beneath chandeliers. The room held its breath. Nathaniel felt those words reach him without naming him, and somehow that mercy made them hurt more. But I see a woman who refused to let poverty decide what beauty meant. I see every working mother who dressed her child for picture day before buying something for herself. I see every father who wore the same good shoes to every interview until the soles thinned out. I see every grandmother who kept one church dress wrapped in plastic because it reminded her that hard years did not take her grace. Amara lifted her chin slightly. The old blue fabric caught the light, and for the first time that night, it seemed to command the room instead of defend itself. We have confused luxury with worth for too long. We have taught people to apologize for what they cannot afford, while ignoring the richness of what they have survived. But a person's value is not measured by the label on their clothes, the neighborhood they came from, or how comfortable they make powerful people feel. A quiet sound moved through the room, not applause yet, but recognition. When you mock what someone wears, you may be mocking the only piece of love they have left. When you dismiss someone's accent, job, home, or history, you may be dismissing the very road that carried them here. And when you invite working families into your mission but not into your respect, charity becomes performance. That sentence settled over the ballroom like a mirror no one could look away from. Marjorie lowered her gaze. Celeste stopped pretending to smile. Elise Palmer, near the side wall, forgot to check her phone. Amara looked toward the cameras, but her words were for the people beyond them. So tonight, I ask that we do more than give. Let us listen. Let us hire. Let us mentor. Let us pay fairly. Let us stop treating survival stories as touching entertainment and start treating the people who live them as leaders." The applause began at the back, where the catering staff stood. Then it spread to the tables, to the donors, to the reporters, to the board members who had expected numbers and received a conscience. Soon the room was standing. Amara did not smile right away. She looked once toward Nathaniel, not accusing him, not rescuing him from his shame, simply seeing whether he understood. He stood slowly with everyone else, his hands coming together in applause that felt nothing like celebration and everything like confession. For the first time in their marriage, he was not proud because other people admired his wife. He was humbled because he finally did. The applause lasted longer than Amara expected, and somehow that made it harder to move. She stood at the microphone beneath the warm wash of stage lights, her mother's dress glowing in a room that had nearly dismissed it, while hundreds of people remained on their feet. Some clapped with admiration. Some clapped because everyone else did. Some clapped with the uncomfortable expression of people who had just recognized themselves in the lesson. Amara accepted none of it as victory. Victory felt too sharp a word for something so tender. This was not about defeating a room. It was about forcing the room to remember its own humanity. When she stepped down from the stage, the cameras followed in a bright, shifting tide. Microphones appeared near her, careful but eager. Reporters asked about Rosalind Brooks, about Second Sunday Stitch, about the women who had taught one another to sew dignity into donated fabric. Diane Porter stayed near Amara's side, not controlling the questions, only making sure they did not turn careless. Nathaniel watched from a few feet away as his wife answered each person with patience. She did not make herself small. She did not make herself cruel. That seemed to humble him most. He had spent years thinking strength had to enter a room with a title, a fortune, or a warning. Amara's strength entered gently and left. People unable to return to who they had been before. A young reporter asked, "Mrs. Whitmore, did you expect your dress to become the story of the evening?" Amara looked down at the old blue fabric, then smiled softly. "No, I expected it to remind me who raised me. Sometimes that is enough." The reporter's eyes softened, and the camera stayed on Amara's face as if it understood that the answer did not need improvement. Behind them, Celeste Monroe attempted to reclaim the evening with polished laughter and strategic positioning. She stepped beside a well-known magazine editor, angled her body toward a photographer, and lifted her champagne glass just enough to catch the light. But the photographer lowered his camera, murmured something about needing more footage of Amara, and walked past her. It was not humiliation in the loud way Celeste deserved. It was quieter, cleaner, almost elegant. She was not punished. She was simply no longer important to the moment. That was worse for someone who had mistaken attention for worth. Marjorie Whitmore approached more slowly. For once, she did not carry herself like a woman arriving to correct something. Her pearl earrings trembled slightly as she stopped in front of Amara. Nathaniel turned toward his mother, suddenly tense, but Amara remained still. "Your speech was beautiful," Marjorie said. The words sounded formal at first, then struggled toward honesty. "And necessary." Amara studied her face. There had been a time when she would have rushed to ease the older woman's discomfort, to smile, to forgive the small cuts because they were delivered in a quiet voice. "Not tonight." "Thank you," Amara said, and let the words be enough. Marjorie looked at the dress. "Your mother must have been remarkable." "She was," Amara replied. "You would have respected her." The sentence was not an accusation, but Marjorie received it like one. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She nodded, her eyes lowering. "I believe I would have had much to learn from her." It was not an apology, not yet, but it was the first crack in a wall built long before Amara entered the family. Nathaniel stepped forward then, but the movement drew Amara's eyes. To him, with a calm warning. He stopped. A few months earlier, he would have placed his hand at her back, answered on her behalf, guided her away when attention became unpredictable. Now he seemed to understand that even comfort could become control when offered without permission. "Amara," he said quietly. She waited. Around them, the gala continued in fragments, pledges being announced, donors speaking in hushed voices, the string quartet beginning again with something softer than before. "I am sorry," he said. The words came too soon and too late at once. Too soon because he did not yet understand the full shape of what he had done. Too late because she had needed them in the car, in the penthouse, at every luncheon where he let silence stand between her and insult. Not here, she said gently. His face tightened, not with anger, but with the pain of being denied the immediate relief forgiveness might have given him. I did not mean to embarrass you. Amara's eyes held his. No, Nathaniel. You were embarrassed by me. That is different. The sentence was quiet enough that only he heard it, but it changed his face more than any public accusation could have. For the first time all night, he looked less like a billionaire surrounded by influence, and more like a man standing in front of the truth with nothing expensive enough to cover him. Elise Palmer appeared nearby, phone buzzing in her hand, her professional smile flickering between panic and triumph. Amara, Nathaniel, the foundation donations have doubled since the speech. Several networks want a joint interview before you leave. If we move quickly, we can shape the message around unity and legacy. Amara turned to her with a calm so complete it made Elise stop talking. There will be no joint interview tonight. Elise blinked. But the public response is extraordinary. Then let the response belong to the women this foundation claims to serve. Amara looked toward the catering staff near the back, the exhibit photographs, the volunteers who had been invisible until the room needed sincerity. Interview them. Ask their names. Ask what they need when the gala ends. Diane Porter smiled almost imperceptibly. Nathaniel said nothing, but something in his silence had changed. It was no longer avoidance. It was surrender. When Amara finally moved toward the exit, the cameras followed again, not because she demanded them, but because truth has a gravity beauty cannot imitate. Nathaniel walked several steps behind her. For once, he did not try to catch up and become part of the image. He watched the old blue dress move through the golden room with the quiet authority of a flag that had survived the storm. And he understood, with a shame that would follow him long after the lights went out, that the world had not discovered his wife that night. It had merely seen what he should have honored from the beginning. The town car carried them home through a quieter Manhattan, where the same streets that had glittered before the gala now looked washed in softer light. It was close to midnight, and the city had changed its rhythm. Delivery bikes moved between yellow cabs. Steam rose from a manhole near Park Avenue. A couple waited at a crosswalk with takeout bags swinging between them, laughing about something small and ordinary. Amara watched them through the tinted window and wondered when ordinary had started to feel like a luxury. Nathaniel sat beside her without speaking. His tuxedo still looked perfect, but something in him had come undone beneath it. The phone in his hand kept lighting up with messages from board members, reporters, Elise Palmer, and names Amara did not care to recognize. He did not answer any of them. Every few minutes, his eyes moved toward her dress, not with embarrassment now, but with the cautious reverence of a man standing outside a church after realizing he had mocked the prayer. Amara kept her hands folded in her lap. The old blue fabric rested beneath her fingers, warm from the ballroom lights, carrying applause, memory, and exhaustion in the same quiet folds. When they reached the penthouse, the elevator rose in silence. Neither of them looked at the mirrored walls. By the time the doors opened, the apartment felt different from how they had left it, though nothing had moved. The marble still shone. The chandelier still burned above the entryway. The 3 designer gowns Elise had sent remained draped across the guest room sofa, untouched, beautiful, and suddenly irrelevant. Amara walked past them without looking. Nathaniel followed her into the bedroom and stopped near the doorway, exactly where he had stood hours earlier when he asked why she would choose that dress. The memory filled the room before either of them spoke. Amara removed her earrings and placed them on the vanity. Her movements were slow, careful, not dramatic. Nathaniel watched her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time, he did not see a woman failing to match his world. He saw a woman who had been carrying her own world with grace while he kept asking her to set it down. I owe you more than an apology, he said. Amara met his eyes in the mirror. Yes, you do. The answer was not cruel. That made it heavier. Nathaniel stepped forward, then stopped himself, keeping several feet between them. I thought I was protecting you from people who would judge you. His voice lowered. But I was one of them. Amara turned then, facing him fully. The city lights behind her outlined her shoulders in silver. You protected your comfort, Nathaniel. Not me. He nodded once, as if the words had found the exact place they belonged. I know. Do you? She asked. Because tonight was not the first time. It was just the first time other people were watching. He looked down. The cufflinks bearing his family crest seemed almost childish now, two bright symbols of a name that had taught him how to enter rooms, but not how to honor the people already standing inside them. At the luncheons, Amara continued, her voice steady. When your mother corrected how I introduced myself. When your friends joked that I was your conscience in heels. When Elise rewrote my answers because my own words were too emotional for the brand. You heard all of it. You always heard it. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. I told myself silence was diplomacy. Silence was agreement. He opened his eyes, and there was no defense left in them. That mattered, but it did not repair what had been broken. Amara reached for the small velvet ring tray beside the mirror, the place where she sometimes left her wedding band before sleep. She turned the ring slowly between her fingers, watching the light move over it. Nathaniel's breath changed, but he did not interrupt. I loved you because I thought you saw me clearly, she said. Not perfectly, but clearly. I thought you saw the woman from the community center, the daughter of Rosalind Brooks, the girl who learned to make dignity out of what was available. Her fingers closed around the ring. Somewhere along the way, you started seeing me through their eyes. His voice came rougher now. Tell me how to fix it. Amara looked at him for a long moment, and in that look was all the tenderness she had not wasted, all the patience she had spent, all the hope she was too wise to give away cheaply again. That is the problem, she said softly. You still think love is something you can fix once someone tells you the steps. Nathaniel absorbed that in silence. The city hummed beyond the glass. Far below, a siren passed and faded into distance, leaving the penthouse quieter than before. Then what do I do? He asked. Amara placed the ring back on the tray, not as a final goodbye, but not as a promise either. You learn. You listen when no camera is there. You stop managing the story and start respecting the truth. You go back to the people this foundation photographs for its brochures, and you ask what they need after the flowers come down and the donors go home. She lifted her chin. And you do it without putting your name on everything good. Nathaniel nodded slowly. And us? The question came out small, stripped of billionaire certainty. Amara looked toward the 3 untouched gowns in the other room, then down at the dress her mother had made from scraps and faith. I'm going to stay at the community center apartment for a while, she said. I need space where no one is embarrassed by my history. Pain crossed his face, but he accepted it. That was the second honest thing he gave her that night. Will you let me earn the right to know you again? Amara picked up her coat from the chair, the old blue dress moving softly around her legs. Do not earn it for me, she said. Earn it because you should have been that kind of man already. And when she walked out, Nathaniel did not follow. He stood alone in the beautiful room, surrounded by everything money could buy, and felt, perhaps for the first time in his life, the poverty of having been admired without being wise. Morning found Amara not in the penthouse above Manhattan, but in the small community center apartment on West 132nd Street, where the radiators clicked before sunrise and the kitchen window looked down on a row of bodegas, brownstones, and people beginning honest days. She had slept only a few hours, but the quiet there felt different. It did not ask her to become impressive. It did not measure her against crystal chandeliers or designer labels. On the back of a wooden chair, the midnight blue dress rested carefully inside a garment bag, not hidden, not retired, simply protected. Her phone had not stopped lighting up since dawn. Diane Porter's article had been published before breakfast, and by 8 o'clock, news stations were replaying clips from the gala. The headlines called Amara graceful, powerful, unforgettable, but the message that mattered most came from women she had never met. A teacher in Atlanta wrote that she still wore her late mother's coat on the first cold day of every year. A hotel housekeeper in Chicago sent a photograph of the shoes she wore to 3 graduations. A young woman in Detroit said she had always been embarrassed by the dress her grandmother made for prom, but now she wanted to find it again. Amara read those messages at the small kitchen table where she had once helped teenagers fill out scholarship forms, and she understood that the night had become bigger than her marriage. It had become a mirror for people who had carried love in ordinary things and been taught to call them small. Across town, Nathaniel did not issue a statement through Elise Palmer. He did not post a polished apology beside a professional photograph. Instead, at 9:30 that morning, he walked into the West 132nd Community Center without cameras, without assistants, without his family name printed on anything. The receptionist nearly dropped her coffee when she saw him, but he only asked if there was work that needed doing. By noon, he was in the basement storage room carrying boxes of donated winter coats, sorting children's boots by size, and listening as the center director explained that the annual gala had raised money. Yes, but what they needed most was steady funding for job training, childcare during evening classes, and transportation cards for women who could not afford to get to interviews. Nathaniel listened, really listened. For once, he did not turn need into a speech about generosity. He wrote nothing for the press. He asked questions. He took notes. He looked at the old sewing machines lined against the wall and seemed to understand that dignity often works quietly before anyone rich decides to sponsor it. Over the next 3 months, Amara built something from the attention the world had briefly given her. She refused offers that wanted only her face and accepted partnerships that served real women with real bills, real children, real dreams delayed by survival. With Diane's help, she founded the Rosalind Brooks Foundation, a program offering sewing certification, interview coaching, small business workshops, and emergency support for working mothers across New York City. Nathaniel donated the first major grant, but when his attorneys asked where to place the Whitmore name, he told them not to. It already has the right name, he said. Marjorie came one afternoon with no pearls, no driver waiting at the curb, and a box of her own late mother's sewing patterns. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked if anyone could use them. That was how apology began in a family that had never been taught to say the word without choking on pride. By spring, the foundation opened its first public workshop in a renovated storefront in Harlem. There were folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, fresh paint still drying near the windows, and 23 women waiting beside donated sewing machines. No chandelier, no velvet ropes, no cameras at first, until Diane arrived with one photographer and a promise that the story would belong to the women in the room. Amara wore the midnight blue dress again, restored but not made new. The original seems still visible because some repairs deserve to be honored, not erased. Nathaniel arrived late and stood near the back, holding a box of printed workbooks. He did not move forward until Amara saw him. He did not touch her hand until she offered it. When she did, it was not a full forgiveness, not a return to the old marriage, because the old marriage had been built with too much silence in the walls. It was something more careful and more honest, the beginning of two people learning that love without respect is only possession dressed in tenderness. After the first class, Amara watched a mother of 3 guide blue thread through a needle while her little boy colored at the corner table. The woman laughed when the stitch came out crooked. Amara leaned beside her and said, "Then we will make the crooked part of the story." Across the room, Nathaniel heard the words and lowered his eyes, remembering the first day he met her, remembering the woman he had almost lost because he had mistaken polish for worth. Later, when a local reporter asked Amara what the dress meant now, she looked down at the fabric, then toward the women filling the room with patient, determined hands. "It means my mother was right," she said. "No room gets to decide how small you are. Only you decide how fully you stand in it." The camera lingered on her face, then on the dress, then on the women behind her, and for once the image needed no correction. The story had found its proper frame. Not a billionaire's wife rescued by attention, not a poor girl transformed by luxury, but a woman who carried her mother's dignity into a room that underestimated her and left the door open for others to walk through. And Nathaniel, standing behind her where he finally belonged, understood that the greatest luxury he had ever been offered was not wealth, admiration, or control. It was the chance to become worthy of the woman who had never needed his world to shine.